We can't assume that our harbors are safe havens any longer. You've seen the technology that Ukraine used successfully in Russia. You've seen what Israel managed to get drones inside Iran to launch them from there. We can't assume that we're safe at home any longer. We need to be ready to fight right here. And that's a real mindset change.
This is the Expert Series podcast from the CDA Institute, Canada's premier defense and security think tank. I'm Josh Malm, and it's Tuesday, July 16th, 2025.
We're under no illusions about the scale of the challenges ahead. Russia's unprovoked and brutal war against Ukraine continues to destabilize the global security landscape. China's growing ambitions and increasingly assertive behavior are eroding stability in the Indo-Pacific. And the erratic actions of regimes like North Korea and Iran are undermining the rules-based order.
With the Royal Canadian Navy facing urgent demands to grow its workforce, maintain aging ships, and prepare for increasingly complex security challenges in the Arctic and Indo-Pacific, can it realistically balance immediate operational needs with long-term modernization, and what trade-offs will be necessary to succeed? Today, Vice Admiral Angus Topshee, Commander of the Royal Canadian Navy, joins us for a discussion on the future of the Royal Canadian Navy, its challenges, priorities, and role in a more contested global security environment. We'll cover recruitment, retention, and training reform, shipbuilding, sustainment and modernization, readiness, and Canada's naval posture in the Arctic, Indo-Pacific, and the Antarctic. Today, we're honored to be joined by a distinguished guest, Vice Admiral Angus Topshee, Commander of the Royal Canadian Navy. Vice Admiral Topshee, thanks for taking the time to speak with the CDA Institute today. It's a real privilege and honor to have you on the program. To start us off, what are your top priorities right now as Commander of the RCN? And what would you say are the key challenges and opportunities currently shaping your focus and your approach?
Yeah, so when I took over, I set out three priorities. It was really, they're very simply expressed: people, platforms, and being ready to fight. So on the people front, it's about attracting, recruiting, and training as many great Canadians as we can to fill the holes in the Navy and ideally grow back to the health and potentially beyond. And so that's getting back up to our 8,600 core strength for the regular force and 5,600 for the reserve force. For platforms, it's all about what we've talked about: building the future fleet. So that's finishing the job with the Arctic and offshore patrol vessels, delivering the joint support ships, delivering the river class destroyers, developing a path to the procurement of a submarine and potentially also a continental defense corvette, and maybe some other capabilities that we need to really assure the defense of Canada and the maritime domain. The one where I'm spending more time on lately is that ready to fight aspect. How do I make sure that the sailors of the Royal Canadian Navy are really of the right mindset for this moment, and that if they were called upon to be tested in combat, that they could meet that moment? And that is a real challenge because we've had a mindset of it's peacetime expeditionary warfare, where, we always imagined that the threat would be something that happened over there. We would have, 10 days to get the ship ready to go. Our ships traditionally being kept at 10 days notice to move, and then the ship would have 2 to 3 weeks during the transit across to get ready to the mission. They could do all sorts of training and everything else. And then they arrive in theater, 3 weeks after the beginning of the crisis, and they're fully ready to go. We don't have the luxury of that time anymore. So what I'm looking to do is raise the readiness of the Canadian Navy across the board so that we've got a fleet that is ready to fight from the moment we sail harbor. And if the threat comes into our harbor, we're ready to defend ourselves because we can't assume that our harbors are safe havens any longer. You've seen the technology that Ukraine used successfully in Russia. You've seen what Israel managed to get drones inside Iran to launch them from there. We can't assume that we're safe at home any longer. We need to be ready to fight right here. And that's a real mindset change. We spent a lot of time where our biggest safety concern was making sure that there is no way we could ever inadvertently use ammunition or anything else. Well, we need to go to a place where actually we normally have ammunition loaded. We know there are 3 levels of safety to our weapon systems. There's a mechanical safety where it's physically impossible for the weapon to be made to fire. There's an electrical safety where there's a separate electrical interlock that has to be disabled in order for the weapon to fire. And then finally, there's procedural safety. Even if the weapon is fully enabled, we only shoot on order, when we meet the criteria under the rules of engagement. So there's 3 levels of safety there. I want to get us closer to that mechanically safe mindset where we are going to be ready to fight. And all it does is that, we're ready to go. If the circumstances warrant, we are able to defend ourselves. We are able to defend Canada and Canadians right away because the world is just not as safe as it was before. I think the biggest challenge we face today is trying to sustain the current fleet and manage our current personnel shortages as we grow, build the future fleet and grow back to health on the personnel side. So the money that the government has just announced does a lot to help that, because the investment this year, while it's a lot of money coming in, there are a lot of needs. And so we can put a lot of that money directly into the maintenance of the current fleet, restocking all of our spare part bins, and ensuring that we're really able to support our sailors in maintaining the current fleet, to buy us the time to build the fleet that can and needs to meet the current security model.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Vice Admiral Topshee. There's been growing recognition that the rules-based international order, something middle powers like Canada depend on for their security and prosperity, is under increasing strain. From your perspective, what are some of the key challenges Canada faces as a middle power? And more specifically, how does the RCN contribute to upholding that international order at a time when it's being tested?
Yeah, so I think what we're seeing is that there's a lot of uncertainty about whether or not the rules-based international order is going to survive. And in a sort of might makes right world, you have to have a very hard-eyed look at what capabilities do you need to be able to assert your national interest and defend your country. And so I think the government's commitment to meet the NATO investment in defense is a clear sign that they are committed to making sure that we have the military that can protect Canada and Canadian interests. So I think it is troubling. I think in the naval side, we need ships that can ensure that we have the ability to defend our oceans, all three of our oceans. And so that's why the combination of capabilities we're building with the River class destroyers, the first of those, HMCS Fraser, now under construction in Halifax, the intended acquisition of up to 12 conventionally powered diesel electric submarines, and then finally the Harry DeWolf class of Arctic icebreakers that we've already delivered. That's a good mix of capabilities. We're looking at adding to those with the joint support ships that will enable us to keep our ships in operation. And what I'd say there, it may seem as though, a supply ship is something that's all about international operations. It's not. If I'm trying to put a bunch of frigates and eventually some destroyers out to defend the approaches to Canada in the Atlantic or Pacific, I want to keep that ASW platform out on the high seas, out 200, 300 miles from Canada's shore, to pick the submarine up, as it comes into range. If it has to make the 2-3 day trip into port to refuel, it's no longer as valuable an asset, and I need more of them. So having a tanker on each coast, ideally having more than a tanker on each coast, would really allow us to make sure that we could keep those forces at sea when we need them at sea, so that, we're just like the new Husky tankers enable the Air Force's operation. We need the right mix of tankers to enable the Canadian Navy's operations.
Wonder if you might be able to discuss in a little bit more detail some of the current capability shortfalls experienced by the RCN and what kind of capabilities need to be most prioritized. One thing there's been a lot of discussion about is unmanned systems, for instance, ghost fleets.
So we've actually done some experimentation. We just wrapped up a series of experiments where we took some of our old hammerhead targets. So these are sort of powerboat sized vessels that we used to use as gunnery targets to see if we could defend our ships against a small boat threat that would come at high speed in towards the ship. Well, 2 months ago, we said, we need to take a look at what's going on in Ukraine. I want to do an experiment where we weaponize this system, put an explosive payload into it, and we were able to successfully drive one of those hammerhead targets using a satellite downlink, actually. So basically independent of range, and drive it using a first-person visual into another target. So we are working to develop those capabilities. And I think the future is, it's going to be a mix of things. There's no one answer. When you look in the Black Sea, you can see that certainly Ukraine has taken full advantage of drones and some of their missiles to make it really difficult for the Russian Navy to operate. That is a littoral environment, which has always been challenging for navies to operate in. That on the high seas, I think you're still going to see, as we get out there to hunt submarines, as we do other things, it's still going to be a largely big ship business, but enabled by all of the other sort of remotely operated, remotely controlled, some autonomous platforms that really build a system, a network of sensors around those bigger platforms to make sure they're fully enabled. And I think that there's, as we look forward to the future, we're going to be delivering the River class destroyers. We'll probably want some large optionally crewed surface vessels to go with those. That's a program that Australia and the US are working on, where they take, to ensure that you've got the right number of missiles in the battle space. It's a platform built around a Mark 41 VLS, a vertical launch system, carries a lot of missiles. And that will normally have a crew, but in times of conflict, that crew could be removed. It could be put farther up threat. And that brings additional reserves the weapons into the battle space. It gives you additional sensor and effector range. It gives you a different mix of things, and also things that you can put at greater hazard because of the fact that they're, ideally uncrewed in combat. So I think there's a lot of different things we're looking at. And plus, we're all about to announce a contract on RCN ISTAR. So that is a remotely controlled remotely piloted drone that'll fly from the back of our Halifax-class frigates, that will allow us to do intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance for up to 12 hours a day, potentially more than that, which will be a great addition to the fleet as well.
Could you maybe dive into some of the specific challenges inherent in the recruitment and retention issue, which is not only affecting the Navy, but affecting so many other components of the CAF?
Yeah, we've got a long legacy of not meeting our recruitment targets. So for the Navy, I think last year was the first time we got, statistics are a fascinating thing. We'll say we hit the target last year. It's the first time really since the turn of the century that we've done that. And so we've built up a massive deficit in terms of the people that we need. The good news is we've got lots of Canadians applying to join the CAF. The bad news is that we still have a fairly bureaucratic process that needs to be reshaped and refocused to deliver a much quicker answer and get the right people through the door more quickly. From the Navy side, we're really working to revamp our training system to make sure that as those people come in the door, we very quickly get them through the training system to the level of skill and experience they need to make a difference on the job at sea.
The RCN is in the process of procuring new equipment and ships to better serve Canada's strategic interests, particularly in the Arctic. In particular, the new Victoria-class submarine replacement process will largely contribute to Arctic security. From your vantage point, what might be the primary purpose of the new submarine in the Arctic, and how does that mission inform what kind of replacement might be required?
Yeah, a submarine is the best guarantor of security in the maritime domain. So in other words, if you want to make sure that you have control over a body of water, you want to put submarines into it because they bring the self-persistence and lethality that you need to make sure that you can control that part of the water. So we're looking at a replacement for our Victoria class. And the main requirements that are driving what we're looking for is the hardest mission we have to do in Canada, which is deploy from Victoria, British Columbia on our west coast up through the Aleutians, the Bering Strait, and into the Beaufort Sea. Patrol there undetected for 21 days and then return back doing the entire thing submerged and undetected. So that's about a 60-day transit, about 7,000 nautical miles return trip, so round trip. So that's a submarine that's ocean going. It needs to have a submarine that's got that endurance to be able to go under the ice if necessary. And so that's why when we talk about 21 days submerged patrol, that's with zero indiscretions. And so a conventionally powered submarine runs on its batteries, sometimes an air-independent propulsion system, but it has to recharge the batteries by raising a snorkel, a mast that allows it to bring air down to run a diesel and recharge those batteries. We want it to be able to go 21 days without needing to do that to make sure that we have the endurance that we need to be able to be effective in a patrol in that environment. So that requirement, that's a very domestic Canadian requirement to make sure we can ensure our sovereignty in the north, also allows that submarine then to be really useful in international operations if that becomes a priority for the government of Canada.
Given the growing strategic competition and heightened international interest in the Arctic, could you expand on some of the broader security considerations currently shaping Canada's approach to the region?
The reality of the Arctic is, as we've all seen where climate change is, the amount of sea ice in the summer is diminishing. The minimum sea ice extent that you measure in September is on a clear path that is distressingly quickly towards the potential for an ice-free Arctic summer. At the same time, I think you have to understand that in the winter time, the maximum ice extent has shrunk, but not nearly as significantly as the minimum ice extent. And so the Arctic is always going to be a dark, forbidding, ice-covered area in winter. And so we need to be able to manage that area of operations as well. And so in those conditions, we can't assume it's going to be ice-free because it will never be that consistently year-round. So that's part of the challenge. The other challenge is we've got a lot of other non-Arctic nations that are up exploring the Arctic, which is, normal and routine. There's provisions for these things, but the Chinese are up in the Arctic every year. And just keeping an eye on what they're doing, what other countries that go up to the Arctic are doing is part of our rule. And ensuring our sovereignty and security, making sure that anything that happens in or adjacent to our waters is monitored so it doesn't directly impact Canada's sovereignty and security. We're very fortunate with the fleet mix we've got right now that we can manage our requirements in the Arctic with the new fleet of basically the Harry DeWolf class of Arctic icebreakers that we have built. So we've got 4 of those in service right now full time. A fifth one has been delivered to the department. The 6th one to come later this year. And that gives us the capacity to really patrol and assert our sovereignty in the north and respond to any challenge. When it comes to Europe and Indo-Pacific, my focus has been more on Indo-Pacific. The way I look at things is that, over in Europe, you've got a major land war between Soviet Union Russia after its illegal and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. That is a core interest of ours. We're doing everything we can to support Ukraine. And as a direct result of Russian aggression, you can see that Canada's contributed heavily to an enhanced forward presence brigade in Latvia. And so I really see that as the Canadian Army's mission right now to assure deterrence in Europe. I see Europe as more of a land-centric theater. It doesn't mean we don't send ships there, but rather than deploying them for months at a time, we tend to send them across for major exercises. We do some mine countermeasures work over there. Our real focus, and as directed by government under the Indo-Pacific strategy, is to sustain a nearly persistent presence in the Indo-Pacific. And so we're going to be there with a ship just about the entire time. Gaps between ships will be measured in a couple of weeks, not months, as we make sure that Canada really is signaling we are a Pacific nation and we've got the naval presence in theater to show that.
What do you see as the key infrastructure needs in the Arctic from a defense and security perspective? Do you see a potential role for Churchill and Manitoba in that context? And more broadly, how should Canada be thinking about the western end of the Northwest Passage? And would additional naval facilities or ports in that region be strategically beneficial?
Yeah, so we used to have a base in Churchill, Manitoba. I think the last sailors were moved in 1968 when we shut down what was then called HMCS Churchill. I don't know that there's really a need for a naval base in Churchill because you're a long way away from the places that's kind of like putting something in Thunder Bay to defend the Great Lakes. By the time you get to Thunder Bay, you've probably missed the moment to defend the Great Lakes. So my preference would be to be farther forward in terms of basing up there. Whether there's an economic viability to a port in Churchill is something that I think it would be really interesting to look at a business case for. It's still going to be frozen for large parts of the year. So can you get icebreakers that can keep a shipping route open, or can you build big grain carriers, potentially LNG or oil carriers that are ice strengthened or ice breaking capable? They've done it with some bulk carriers and things like that. So I think there's potentially a business case for Churchill as a port. And if it happened as a port, then it would be interesting for us to use it as a support hub from time to time. But I wouldn't build a naval base there per se. As you look up into the north, Iqaluit is always going to be a challenge. The government's built a deep water port facility there, but it's got more than a 10-meter tide. It's some of the highest tides in the world, which will always really complicate things. And the other factor is that port freezes throughout the winter, so it becomes really challenging to use it. And that's true of all of our eastern Arctic ports. Nuuk in Greenland is a great port because it remains ice-free through the winter, the outer port. And we've got really good allies in Denmark who are quite keen for us to continue to use that port to support and sustain our efforts up north. So I think take advantage of allies where it makes sense. You mentioned the Western Arctic, and that's the real problem. There is not really any deep water port in the Western Arctic. The sort of best, and I use that term loosely, port is actually Nome, Alaska, and that's south of the Bering Strait. And it's a pretty poor port from the point of view of resupply and refueling because it's not got the depth or the support infrastructure really that's necessary to sustain operations. The U.S. isn't interested in investing more in that, but as we've seen lately, it's we kind of want to have our own ability to support ourselves and sustain ourselves in the north. So I do think that there'd be a real reason for us, the government of Canada, to look at a Western port in the Arctic. There's been talk about Grays Bay as a possibility. There's a couple of other options. I don't think it's up to me to try and figure out the best place. I have thoughts from a Navy perspective, but I think the key to development in the north is not building it for a single purpose. Is there a place where we could put a deep water port that would enable the northern communities, the peoples of the north, that has the support of the premiers, that has the support of the Indigenous people of the north, that would enable and support the right types of sustainable development in the north, and which would benefit Canada from a security point of view? I think there are probably some good options there. And with the new commitment to 1.5% of GDP on defense-related infrastructure spending, there's a great opportunity for us to make a wise investment in the north. I'd like to see us get started on that sooner rather than later, because building in the north, even just getting agreement on where we should build and building consensus around what type of development it is, can take a lot of time. So the sooner we start, the better.
The RCN recently conducted a deployment to Antarctica, a region we don't hear about as often in the Canadian security discourse compared to the Arctic. Could you speak to Canada's interest in the Antarctic and more broadly, how you view the strategic or security considerations in that part of the world?
Yeah, so Canada is not a consultative party to the Antarctic Treaty, but a lot of the issues that exist in Antarctica are very similar to the issues that exist in the Arctic. We see an increasing Chinese presence in Antarctica, just as we've seen an increasing Chinese presence in the Arctic. And so a lot of the motivation for us to go down to Antarctica was to take a look, see what's happening down there, talk to our allies from South America. The Chileans and the Argentinians, the Brazilians had a lot to say, tell us about what they were observing in Antarctica. It gave us a chance to interact with some of those navies of South America to get a better sense of how we can cooperate for maritime security more broadly. And so from our perspective, a highly successful deployment. It also proved the capability of the Harry DeWolf class, that it's able to operate in the very difficult and demanding conditions of the Southern Pole, just as well as it did in the Northern Pole. So we're really excited about that deployment, and it's pretty cool to be able to say that the Royal Canadian Navy has now visited all 7 continents, that we have sent ships south of the Antarctic Circle. And Margaret Brooks had a pretty exceptional year. Within 12 months, they've gone north of the Arctic Circle, crossed the equator, gone south of the Antarctic Circle. And later this year, they're actually going to go through the entire St. Lawrence Seaway and get to Thunder Bay, heading as far west across Canada as you can without technically leaving the Atlantic.
As Canada deepens its engagement in the Indo-Pacific, we're seeing significant expansion in China's naval capabilities and increasingly assertive posturing, particularly around Taiwan and key maritime trade routes that are vital to both Canadian and global economic interest. From a strategic standpoint, how might Canada's presence in the region contribute to fostering greater stability and security? And could you speak to any specific initiatives or approaches the RCN is pursuing in the region?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do a number of things over there. So one of the major activities we do is what we call Operation Neon. That's the enforcement of sanctions against North Korea for their continued efforts to build a ballistic nuclear missile program. So we enforce that. We contribute to the enforcement of that UN Security Council resolution. We also do activities with our allies and partners in the region. So maritime cooperative activities with, last year we did Philippines, Japan, and the US operating together basically in the Philippine exclusive economic zone to demonstrate that all 4 of our countries were dedicated to basically the rule of law. We show our support at every opportunity for the rules-based international order. There is a process to resolve, boundary disputes, jurisdictional disputes in the oceans and seas of the world, and we want all countries to follow that process. Negotiations is the right way to get to an outcome. We've gone through it successfully with Denmark over Hans Island. And so what we believe is that countries should adhere to that set of rules that prevent conflict.
Do you see additional opportunities for the RCN to collaborate with allied navies through joint operations or multilateral exercises like RIMPAC, for example?
Yeah, so absolutely. I'm really keen on one of the things we're doing right now. So HMCS Ville de Quebec, one of our Halifax-class frigates, has joined the Prince of Wales Strike Group, which the UK is calling Operation High Mast. And so that's the deployment of the Prince of Wales through the Mediterranean, the Suez and the Red Sea, across the Indian Ocean and into the Indo-Pacific. So they were in Singapore last week. Ville de Quebec is fully integrated into that task group, which means that we're there. We're working with allies, so there's a number of different partner nations involved in that effort. And it gives Ville de Quebec a lot of great training as they're doing everything. It increases the impact because there's greater visibility when you've got a force assembled of that size. And it really demonstrates Canada's support for that rules-based international order we talked about before. So for me, things like that, joining into allied deployments like High Mast is really good. RIMPAC remains a really important exercise for us to do. And so that's every second year, run out of Hawaii, the largest maritime exercise in the world. And then also we took part in Talisman Sabre, which is an Australian exercise earlier this year. That was actually Ville de Quebec. So actually, I think Talisman Sabre is about to happen, as part of the UK Carrier Strike Group deployment. So that's the way we want to do it. So wherever we can sort of really partner with other allies to take part in things, to me, that's an ideal thing. But all of that has to be, we have to remember that our first and foremost mission is the defense of Canada. And so I need to make sure that I've got the right forces back in Canada always, that if there were to be a potentially adversarial submarine coming across the Atlantic or the Pacific towards our coast, that we have the forces in place to demonstrate that we can track and defeat that submarine if necessary. And towards that end, we've got a great partnership especially in the Atlantic, amongst a group of nations to make sure that we can track the submarine deployments.
The NATO summit took place a few weeks ago with some significant developments, perhaps most notably Canada's commitment to increase defense spending to 2% of GDP, and then at some point 5%. So it's clear Canada is aiming to demonstrate that it's a reliable and capable NATO ally. With existing operations like Unifier and Renaissance already underway, do you see additional opportunities, maybe from a naval perspective, for Canada to strengthen its contributions to NATO and deepen its collaboration with allied partners?
I think we're probably at about the right level of effort from a Navy right now. So we contribute to the NATO mine countermeasure mission as part of Op Reassurance with our maritime coastal defense vessels and transitioning to the Harry DeWolf class of Arctic offshore patrol vessels. We do episodic presence with frigates to support major NATO exercises, which are all structured around a campaign to demonstrate deterrence to Russia. That, I think, makes sense. I don't see the need for a significant new investment in that area, given the current state of the fleet, what we've got. Unfortunately, the only submarine we have operational right now is in the Pacific, so it's not possible to dedicate it to NATO duties in the Atlantic right now. As we build to the future and we take delivery of the Fraser, HMCS Fraser and the other ships of the River class, I do see us potentially doing a lot more on the NATO side. But we got to be realistic about what we're able to do with the resources we have right now.
Vice Admiral Topshee, thank you again for your time today. Before we wrap up, I'd like to bring the conversation full circle. So as of June 30th, 2025, how would you assess the overall health and readiness of the RCN? And looking ahead, what do you see as the key short to medium term priorities needed to ensure the Navy continues to fulfill its core mandate?
Yeah, I mean, I tell sailors all the time that the future of the Royal Canadian Navy is extremely bright. The capabilities that the government has promised to deliver, the investment that they're making in defense, the incredible ships and hopefully soon submarines that we're going to be delivering, we've got a really, really bright future. But the next 5 years are going to be really hard. That is our reality. We don't have all the sailors we need. Our ships are older than I would like. We've got the money now to maintain that fleet and readiness to start to build back the infrastructure that we need. And most importantly, to make sure that we properly compensate and support all of the incredible sailors and their families that are in the Royal Canadian Navy right now. So I am excited by what we're putting in place, but we need to be really mindful of the fact that we dug ourselves a pretty deep hole. It's going to take us a lot of work, a lot of hard work to get through this next period of time. And what I'm looking for is some more people to join our ranks and help us get through these next few years, because boy, the future really is bright. We're building a great Navy for Canada, and it's an incredible time to join. It's been an unbelievable career. And we've got great programs as well, like our 1-year naval experience program that allows people just to try out the Navy with no strings attached, $42,000, free room and board, an experience of everything the Navy has to offer over 1 year. So there's great opportunity, but I try not to understate the amount of work we have to do right now.
Vice Admiral Topshee, it has truly been an honor to have you with us today. Your insights into this wide range of challenges we've discussed have been invaluable, I think, for our audience, and I'm confident they will gain great benefit from hearing your perspectives. Thank you for generously sharing your time and expertise with us today, and for making space in your busy schedule to join the Institute. And that's all for today's episode. The Expert Series is released every Tuesday and Thursday, but we'll be taking a bit of a break this summer and releasing one podcast a week. If you want to learn more about the CDA Institute, follow us on social media, visit our website at cdainstitute.ca, or subscribe to our newsletter for the latest updates on Canadian defense and international security. If you have comments or feedback about what you heard in today's edition, email josh@cdainstitute.ca. I'm Josh Malm. Until next time.